Das ist Zeit für Deutsch.
Hey Dutchies, I'm here on my back porch, and behind me is the flag that I fly off of the back porch of our house, and it gets a lot of questions from people. What is that? Where's that from? This is the Easton Flag, and it's got quite the story behind it. There's a lot of questions as to where's it come from, what's the actual history of this flag. So I called on my good friend Richard Mammana, who's an expert in all things Northampton County. So let's go into the studio and talk to him to learn the story of this early American flag. Hey, everybody, we are here in the studio. As promised, I brought our good friend, a good friend of the channel, Richard Mammana, on to the show to talk to us about the story behind the Easton flag. Most Americans have no idea about it, and I think we're gonna try to answer some questions about this flag that's a little bit wrapped in mystery somewhat, but also to bring you a fact that most Americans will find shocking. How's that for setting the tone, Richard? What do you think?
Well, it's as exciting as you let it be, I think.
That's right. So let's tackle this cool story. I think it's an awesome story from history of the Easton flag, or as we say in Pennsylvan Dutch, the Easton fauna. And there is an image of it, and you'll see more images of it here throughout the presentation. But we got to go through a little bit of backstory first. And that is, there are some questions around this flag, controversies surrounding this flag. One is there's an argument over when it was actually made and designed. We'll tackle that question. And then the other one is that there are some people that believe that this actually was the very first Stars and Stripes and not the flag that we think of from Betsy Ross, which we'll talk a little bit about Betsy Ross here too. But these are the two questions we're going to try to tackle today and let you think a little bit differently about American history as we go through this presentation. But it all kind of starts with this basic principle of what becomes known as the Flag Act of 1777. Almost a year after the passing, voting, and signature of the Declaration of Independence on the 14th of June, 1777, resolved in the Second Continental Congress that the flag of the 13 United States be 13 stripes, alternate red and white, that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field representing a new constellation. Now, June 14th, of course, is Flag Day in America, so that's the connection to the date, of course. And, you know, when we look at this definition, I mean, Richard and I were talking about this earlier before we hit the record button, but how do you interpret this if you're a flag maker or somebody designing something? And what was I'd like what you said about this, Richard, real quick.
Well, you know, I think it's very interesting, first, your point about it being almost a year after the Declaration of Independence. So until this point, there was no codification or definition of what exactly the flag is composed of. And when we know what it's composed of, the stripes and the stars and their respective colors, we don't get the locations of where they go.
Right.
So this is one of those situations where the flag, the fish can't see the water. You know, we know what the American flag looks like. We know where everything goes. But if you were just presented with this and I'd never seen an American flag, would you know where to put things? Is the grand question. So I think what this was meant to settle in 1777 was a diversity of flags, regimental flags, flags of individual colonies that became states, and the way in which communication was organized at that time. There would have been folks in Massachusetts who wouldn't have seen this for a long period of time, who would have been. And then communication between regiments and between local state judicatories would have been very time consuming, and then also baked in originally to the American Revolution is the bilingual aspect of things. Yeah, so right. as a German native speaker, a Pennsylvania German native speaker, and a German teacher, you know that one of the big problems English speakers and Pennsylvania Dutch people have is prepositions.
Yes.
Right? So white in a blue field. I think that's an alternate red and white. Those are the only location words in here.
Yeah.
So
right off the bat, Congress, from the start, Congress has never been very clear on things. And at least they're still continuing that tradition still today.
Con is the opposite of pro.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So let's start with what everybody knows. Of course, every American child growing up, when you learn about the American Revolution, you learn about Betsy Ross, who lived from 1752 to 1836. And this image, of course, is the iconic Betsy Ross flag. What, but as Richard said, and as we mentioned in that Flag Act, this was one interpretation of that code, right? So this is, of course, the one that gets all the history behind it and the one that everybody knows. But we're going to tell you something about this flag that I think a lot of Americans don't realize. But real quick, Richard, you just jump in whenever you want here.
Sure. Well, let's think about this. So Betsy Ross was a 25-year-old girl when the Flag Act was issued, and the receipt that we have that establishes the legend of her work is a receipt for naval flags for the Pennsylvania Navy. It does not seem to be from the beginning, without some heavy massaging and interpretation, the official United States flag. This is not in any way to discount her creativity, virtue, heroism, skill as a seamstress, any of those things. She was a very important person in American history. And her contribution obviously evolved into what we have now as the American official flag, which has only had its current configuration since 1960. We've only had 50 stars since 1960. Right. So the flag has been an evolving artistic emblem of American unity and pride and heritage and all of those excellent things. And we do obviously get that in some direct way from what Betsy Ross was doing for the Pennsylvania Navy. The whole story is a little bit more complex, as I think we'll be able to tease out.
Yeah, but the one thing I think I'd like to draw everybody's attention to is that last bullet point there is that there is no archival evidence or other recorded verbal tradition to substantiate this story of the first U.S. flag. It appears that the story first surfaced in the writings of her grandson as late as the 1870s, which is 100 years and a century after the original story. And there's no mention or documentation in earlier decades. So, put a question mark behind that. Did this story really happen the way that we're told? Is it a more complex story like what Richard said? I think a lot of history, we find that to be the case often, right?
Yep.
But that's the Betsy Ross flag. Everyone's familiar with it. We think we know what it is. We think we know how it fits into our story. But then there's this Easton flag that challenges this story a little bit or adds to the story. So to give a good look at it there, you can see here we have a very different style flag than what we think of with the Betsy Ross flag. The stripes are in a different position. We have a different style of star on her flag than what this is. An 8-point star, where of course we know today is the 5-point star on the American flag. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we go in a little bit more depth about the flag, just looking at it visually?
Well, this is the flag I grew up with. I was born at Easton. It was the flag, especially in July. Every year that was all over on the streets. And again, there's the sort of the fish don't see the water phenomenon. I didn't know that this was anything so extraordinary other than a local American flag as a kid. Another wrinkle that I think we'll be able to tease out a little bit more is that Easton was an incredibly metropolitan place in the early American colonies and republic. From the 1740s on, it's a bilingual town. There are treaties with Indians there. It's a very important place for church life in German and in English. There's a big Jewish community in Easton. As we'll see, Easton was one of the places where the Declaration of Independence was read early on, right after Philadelphia. So there is great sentiment in favor of the revolution here in Easton. There are also lots of Pennsylvania Dutch volunteers for the revolution. So Northampton County was much larger then, contained parts of what are now Lehigh and Monroe, and perhaps also Carbon. Northampton was one of the original large Pennsylvania Dutch settlements of farms, mainly, that were purchased from the Penn family, but also becomes very early on this great center of trade because of its location on the Lehigh and the Delaware rivers, and then later canal systems and railroads.
So when we look at this flag, there is one argument out there that this flag predates Betsy Ross's flag. And just real quick, is 1776 the year? We'll tell you right now that we can't give you a definitive answer today, people, but we can at least present you with some arguments that are out there about this flag. One, the Easton flag, as we described, 13 stars, 13 stripes, as you just saw. Eventually, 2 stars and 2 stripes were added for the new states of Vermont and Kentucky in 1791 and 1792. And if you don't know your flag history, from 1795 to 1818, American flags had 15 stars and 15 stripes because of these 2 new states that had been added. In fact, the Flag Act of 1794 even, updated their own code to say, no, now it's 15 stars, 15 stripes. Again, most Americans really probably aren't aware of that fact that at one point in our history, that is how our flag looked, right?
Sure. So I think we can say that we don't know if it was made in 1776. We can say that the flag in Easton, as we have it now, was from before the definition of 1794 by Congress.
Right. And then there's this connection to 1812 as another possible date that's important to this flag. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk quickly about how this story ties into this flag as well?
Sure. The flag about which our national anthem is written during the War of 1812 at Fort McHenry had 15 stripes rather than the 13 that we have now, because there were then 15 states. So the tradition I grew up with, which I would reckon is as firm as the tradition of Mrs. Ross's family, if not older, is that when the volunteers for Captain Abraham Horne's regiment for the War of 1812 left Easton in 1814, the flag was given to those troops by a 14-year-old girl who was my cousin, and that the flag in 1814 was the same flag that had been hoisted for the reading of the Declaration of Independence in Easton in 1776. So
there's one connection to this idea that the flag possibly could date to 1776 based on that story. But we do know that it is fact that this flag was taken by Captain Horne with his troops in 1814 into the War of 1812.
The flag we have now at the Easton Public Library is definitely from 1814.
Okay. And just a real quick brief history, in case this is one of those wars that we don't ever really talk much about. The War of 1812, it was between us and Great Britain again, not too long after we had won our independence. And of course it is, as Richard said, probably most famous because it gives us the Star Spangled Banner. But Captain Abraham Horne, as Richard said, took 60 volunteers out of Northampton County along with his son and went into battle, to fight the war. And also what's important to know about, just a little bit of side history too, the War of 1812 touched Washington, D.C. drastically as our new country. Famously burnt, the British burned the White House. So there's one image of that afterwards. And also, of course, here's an image of, and if you ever get the chance to travel to the Smithsonian, you can see the original Star Spangled Banner, the one that Francis Scott Key, wrote the poem about. And as you notice at this point, the flag looks like this. The one that was hoisted over Fort McHenry has more of a look of what we're used to as Americans to see, right? So this is a Pennsylvania Dutch channel, as everybody knows, and we briefly touched a little bit on, the Pennsylvania Dutch, but what is the Pennsylvania Dutch connection to this flag? Because I think here, for me as a Pennsylvania Dutch person, this is where the flag really takes on an extra meaning or an extra layer of meaning to me. So you referenced the Bidelman family. Let's talk briefly about them and how they play into this story.
Well, I'm a Bidelman descendant. So the Bidelmans are an example of Pennsylvania Dutch outside of Pennsylvania. So we think of folks who speak the dialect as being confined to Pennsylvania a lot of the times now, but that's not the whole story. the Delaware in past times was not a barrier as much as it was a highway. Even before there was a bridge, there was a ferry. When I was born, I lived on Ferry Street in Pennsylvania, which is in Easton, which is to get goods to and from New Jersey. So Phillipsburg is on the eastern side of the river from Easton, and the Bidelmans are a big local Lutheran family, German-speaking, affiliated with the Lutheran churches first in Bucks County, and then moved north. And so again, they're from the Pfalz, they're from the Palatinate, much like Pennsylvania Dutch speaking populations were present in huge numbers and still are in different ways in Maryland, in the Virginias, in New York State. This is a New Jersey iteration of the Pennsylvania German experience.
And as is often the case, too, we notice the 3 possible different spellings of the last name. And this is common for anyone that does any genealogy or family ancestry. But yeah, so we have this Bidelman family, but what's the actual connection to the flag in regards to this? But real quick, we'll come up just so everyone knows where they're from in Germany. We can place it Assenheim, which is just outside of Ludwigshafen, right along the Rhine River, not far from the Rhine River at all. They're in the Pfalz, where most of us Pennsylvania Dutch come from, or the majority of us. And this is an image of the Straw Church, correct, Richard?
That's a Straw Church. St. James Lutheran is the proper name. But there's a fluid religious thing going on in Pennsylvania German communities through the 1820s or 30s. Especially German Reformed local folks were German Reformed. Schwenkfelder families married into this community, including my mom's family, and then across the river. Lots of cross-river marriages with English-speaking Presbyterians. The Wagner family were my Schwenkfelder ancestors there, and then also the Howells were local Presbyterians and Episcopalians. So there's a strange slipperiness about the religious identity of this congregation. It seems to be that there's a church, and that people of various backgrounds come into and use it. I mean, it's always served by Lutheran clergy, with some exceptions in the 1810s and 1820s of Episcopal clergy. But the church and then the churchyard are kind of the local anchor of the Bidelman family and their farms. So
who's this Rosina Bidelman, and how does this family get attached to this flag? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Rosina's my pretty close cousin. Her name's also given as Rosanna. And she's a 14-year-old girl when this flag that we now have in the Easton Public Library is presented to the troops who are leaving for the war. I don't think a 14-year-old girl likely made the flag and gave it to the troops. I think it was a treasure of the family since it was created, whether that was before 1795, whether that was in 1776. I think it was an early American local banner that was given to the troops by this girl, sort of honoring the Bidelman family in some way by letting their daughter be part of this send-off. Valentine and Maria Robb Bidelman were the immigrants. They're my, I think, 7th grandparents. George Bidelman was Rosina's father, a prosperous local merchant and trader. He dies just 3 years after this episode with the flag. So the question, this is a Pennsylvania Dutch girl who lives across the river in New Jersey. She speaks German at home. She goes to a Lutheran church. Why is this girl presenting the flag to volunteer troops in a war in the young American Republic? It's a big question, but I don't think you can suss it out without realizing that the Delaware again is not a barrier. It's a highway.
Yeah. Yeah. So one theory or one idea is that it was her family, someone in her family, possibly sewed this flag. Correct. That's
That's that's
one of the ideas out there.
that's right. And there have been textile conservators who have looked at the flag, and they can't narrow it down within a range of 40 years.
Oh, okay. I was going
You
to
know,
ask you that if there were ever
yeah,
any like tests done to the
yes,
flag.
there have been. One of the issues, obviously, is that this fabric was carried across states in battle, so there would be pollen from all over the place on it. And the fibers themselves, I think they can't narrow. I mean, this is sort of Shroud of Turin science, right?
Yeah, yeah.
The fibers themselves can't be narrowed down to a 40-year date range.
Yeah. Okay.
But we have a chain of custody since the end of the War of 1812. So
Okay.
um, I wonder if something new could be done with newer kinds of material
Technology. Yeah.
science. But
Yeah.
I don't know about that.
Yep. And we have a couple things also to share with you in regards to the Bidelman family, and to show you just how, this wasn't some poor farming family by the time that Rosina was involved in this story.
Nope. The Bidelman name is not a big one anymore. Largely because many of these families had huge numbers of daughters. So the descendants of the Bidelmans and the local Pennsylvania German allied family, the Giesers, probably von Geisel, became Howells, Barnetts, and Wagoners, and those names became the more prominent names, which are not sort of as obviously Pennsylvania Dutch.
Yeah. And then we briefly mentioned this, but one other story connected to this flag is that, of course, July 4th is the day that we recognize, of course, is the birthday of America. 1776 happens in Philadelphia. The Declaration is read publicly for the first time there on the steps of Independence Hall. But only 4 days later, it made its way to Easton and Trenton, where the Declaration was publicly read. And one idea is that this flag flew in Easton at the reading of of the Declaration of Independence.
Well, I know that as well as I know my name.
Right.
To be
Okay.
the fact.
That's the story. Yes. That we agree. And what was interesting to speak about the I guess the wealth of Easton and how important this town was. It would take another day yet for the Declaration to be read in New York City. So
Sure.
Easton had the Declaration read publicly before New York City. And this is this photo that we included is a reenactment of them reading the Declaration, and this one happens to be by Chauncey Howell, Bidelman descendant, who reads it there in Easton. Is this tradition still done every year in Easton still today?
It is still done every year. That's my Uncle Chauncey, who was a proud Schwenkfelder and Bidelman descendant. Every year, Easton has something called Heritage Day, which is generally the first weekend after the 4th of July, when there's a reenactment of the reading of the Declaration of Independence and the hoisting of the flag. And there is a great, wonderful celebration on that day still, with tours of lots of local historical sites and reenactments and things like that. Yeah.
So if you want to see the original flag, you can see it, as Richard's mentioned multiple times. Tell us again, where is the actual flag if you wanted to see it yourself?
The Easton Public Library is on, I believe it's on Church Street, off Northampton Street, which is kind of the main street in downtown Easton. It is in the Marks Room, which is the local history research room. And you do have to sign in, because it's a room full of rare documents with climate control and things like that. But people are very friendly. There are bathrooms and water fountains if you need a break during the summer to stop in on your travels. Very, very wonderful, friendly, knowledgeable staff at the Easton Public Library. And this is in a display case now. It's not in the frame that it was in, I think, on the wall in that depiction from the Morning Call. But by the 1940s, people in Northampton County certainly believed that our flag was older than Betsy Ross's flag.
I love it. I love it. I'll put a link to the Easton Library in the show notes so everyone can check out their website and that kind of information. But there's just one last thing that I think a lot of Americans also don't realize about this flag. Eventually, the Easton flag was reproduced on an American stamp.
That's right. Yeah. This is part of a series of historic American flags, which again ties into the idea that the development of the flag was a process, that there were proposals, that there was codification and regulation, but that, even down through the 60s, our flag was still growing, and that in 2000, when this stamp was issued, 25 years ago, this was still something about which the Postal Service, at least, had some awareness of a local history. I do think that our conversation right now is the first deep public examination of the fact that this is a Pennsylvania Dutch story, a Pennsylvania German story. The German heritage of Northampton County is not nearly as widely appreciated or understood as places like Berks County, Lehigh County, Lancaster County, Lebanon County, or even Montgomery County. Yeah. The weight of the population shifts, the German-speaking population shifts away from the cities sooner in Northampton County. So I think this is an exciting thing, and the Easton fauna, it would be a big mistake not to understand this as a Pennsylvania German flag, since it's part of a Pennsylvania German family,
right?
And their contribution to the life of the early American Republic.
And as you guys saw at the beginning of the video, you can buy these flags if you want to fly one at your own home. There's multiple places you can find them, although Richard likes to highlight one place. If you'd like to tell us, and I'll put a link to these guys in the show notes, of course, but if somebody wanted to buy their own Easton flag, I'll tell you, you can get them on Amazon. I found them on Amazon, but there is, Richard, tell us where you got your flag from.
I get them from Kaplan's Awnings, who are a multi-generational local canvas and awning and bag making concern in Easton. Kaplan's are, again, friendly local Northampton County people. They make the flag. It's of very high quality. I think you might get some lower quality versions in some online places, but we've also gotten good ones on Amazon too. Yeah,
I'll put a link.
You can get smaller ones. You can get little, desk size versions if you want. You can get them for the refrigerator magnets. You can, awesome. You get postcards. Everything in Easton, you can get the Easton flag on. The Siegel Museum, SIGAL, is the great local Northampton County Historical and Genealogical Society place to go for Easton flag stuff. So flags, postcards, magnets, desk flags, pins.
All right.
I've never seen an Easton flag tattoo, but
I'm sure they're out there. Well, people, you have your homework now. We told you a story that I think most Americans have no idea exists, that this story is out there, of course, or even that this flag exists and the rich history behind it. I love it. I love this story. I love it enough that I have a Easton flag flying from my back porch, which I'll tell you, Richard, I had friends over and I live out in central Pennsylvania now, out near State College. And I had friends over for dinner not too long ago when we were out there on the patio, and the flag's right there. And everybody that came, because they're all from this part of the state, they all, what's that? What is that flag? What's this? And when I told them this story, all of them found it interesting. And I didn't know that, and it's true. Even for a lot of Pennsylvania Dutch people probably watching this video who didn't grow up in Northampton County or around Easton, growing up, I never saw this flag in Berks County flying anywhere as a kid. So I'm glad that you came on and wanted to help tell this story. I think it's an awesome story to tell, not only just the history of the flag itself, but more importantly, our Pennsylvania Dutch connection to this part of American history. How great is it if we could ever prove that it truly does predate Betsy Ross, and that we created the very first American flag. I think that's an awesome story if we could ever prove it. But even if we can't prove it right now, we can at least continue this story, these oral traditions on, and carry them on into the future as well.
For sure. And maybe we'll make a Kickstarter for some more advanced fiber science. I mean, I don't know. Folks in Easton know this. Folks in Nazareth, Bethlehem, as far as Allentown, know it. So it's one of these hyper regional things, as specific as certain kinds of cheese or meat or.
Right. Well, hopefully this video took the story even a lot farther than the boundaries of Northampton County. Let's just say that.
Great.
Everyone, if you like what we're doing here, you can get your own Pennsylvania Dutch merch. Right now, we're in the process of moving to a new site and a new store. The link is now up and running. We have a couple things there. We're going to be migrating some new things over. Check out Zazzle.com/PA Dutch 101 to get your own Pennsylvania Dutch theme merch. Maybe if I can get some, figure out how to do it, we're going to get some Pennsylvania Dutch Easton Flag merch up there. Maybe if I can figure out how we can do that and not step on anybody's copyright toes or anything like that. And if you like what we're doing here and you'd like to financially support the good work of telling the Pennsylvania Dutch story, you have two options out there, people. You can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Doug Mainford, or you can become a monthly patron for as little as $1 a month on our Patreon account. Just go to Patreon, search PA Dutch 101. And if you're on social media, follow along on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Just look for @PA Dutch 101 and check out our website, padutch101.com, where you can subscribe via email to get an update every time something new posts. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's a great story. I wouldn't have wanted to tell it with anybody else other than you. And I look forward to working with you again, because you have so many great ideas and topics in your head that we need to get on video. So we will welcome Richard back on sometime in the near future. Till then, my friend,
look forward to it.
Doing the good work that you're doing with the Tombstone Project and the other things that you have your hands in. And we'll talk soon, dear friend.
Okay, much good.
Till next time, dear friends, keep practicing your Pennsylvania Dutch and Mock Scoot.
Mock Scoot, and don't forget to like and subscribe. And schlock that notification bell.